The avoidant person made the decision to leave your side, to create distance, to end the relationship, or to withdraw so completely that ending was inevitable, operating under specific assumptions about what that departure would mean for them and for their life. They assumed that leaving would bring relief from the pressure and discomfort they felt in the relationship. They assumed that distance would restore their sense of independence and control that intimacy with you had threatened. They assumed they would feel better alone, that the defended isolation they were returning to would be preferable to the vulnerability that staying with you required. They assumed they could find someone else who would be easier, who wouldn't trigger their defenses so intensely, who would allow them to maintain the emotional distance they needed while still providing companionship and validation. They assumed that leaving you would be like leaving previous relationships, initially uncomfortable, but ultimately manageable, something they would process and move past relatively quickly as they'd done before. But every single one of these assumptions has proven catastrophically wrong. Leaving your side has not brought the relief or the freedom or the improvement in their life that they anticipated. Instead, it has created progressive deterioration in their well-being, their happiness, their sense of meaning and purpose that they did not foresee and that they cannot seem to stop or reverse. The distance from you has not restored their equilibrium, but has destabilized them in ways that are affecting every area of their life. The independence they thought they were protecting has revealed itself to be empty isolation that provides none of the satisfaction their defended narrative promised. The assumption that they could replace you or find someone easier has been demolished by the reality that no one compares to what you offered, and that the easier connections feel hollow and meaningless. What they thought would be liberation has become prison of regret, loneliness, and recognition of what they destroyed. Their life is not better without you. It's demonstrably worse in ways that are becoming more apparent with each passing day, in ways that touch every aspect of their existence, in ways that cannot be ignored or rationalized away despite their best defensive efforts. They had no idea that leaving your side would ruin their life, would create hole they cannot fill, would set in motion decline they cannot halt, would cost them not just the relationship, but their peace, their happiness, their sense that their life is on the right trajectory. And now, they're living with the consequences of a decision made from defended fear rather than from clear sight, consequences that are far more severe and far more permanent than they ever imagined possible. The false confidence. That distance would bring relief and freedom. The avoidant person's decision to leave your side was made with false confidence rooted in their past experiences and their defensive beliefs about what they need to feel okay. They believed with certainty that creating distance from you would solve the discomfort they were experiencing, that removing themselves from the intimacy and the demands of relationship would restore the sense of safety and control they felt they were losing. Understanding this false confidence and why it was so completely wrong reveals both the mechanism of their self-deception and the magnitude of their miscalculation. The avoidant person was confident that distance would bring relief because closeness with you had been creating intense anxiety that they attributed to the relationship itself rather than to their own defensive responses to intimacy. When they were with you, when the relationship was progressing and deepening, they experienced mounting discomfort, a feeling of being trapped or suffocated, a sense that they were losing themselves, an anxiety about becoming too dependent or too vulnerable, a fear that they were at risk of being hurt or abandoned. This discomfort was genuine and intense, and from their perspective, the obvious solution was to remove themselves from the situation creating it. They believed that once they left, once they were no longer in close proximity to you, once the demands and expectations of relationship were removed, this discomfort would dissipate and they would feel better. This belief was based on their past experiences, where creating distance from people did provide temporary relief from intimacy anxiety, confirming their pattern and reinforcing their defensive strategy. But what the avoidant person failed to recognize is that the discomfort they were experiencing wasn't actually caused by the relationship or by you, but was caused by their own fear of intimacy and their attachment wounds being activated by genuine connection. The relationship wasn't the problem. Their inability to tolerate intimacy was the problem. This means that leaving didn't solve anything because the source of their discomfort, their own internal wounds and defensive patterns, came with them when they left. And worse, leaving activated a different set of anxieties and discomforts that they didn't anticipate. The pain of loss, the recognition of what they destroyed, the loneliness of their defended isolation, the awareness that they sabotaged something valuable. So instead of the relief they expected, they're experiencing a different and potentially more intense form of suffering. The avoidant person was confident that distance would restore their freedom and their sense of self that they felt was being threatened by the relationship's intimacy. They experienced the normal interdependence of relationship, making plans together, considering each other in decisions, spending significant time together, sharing emotional experiences, as loss of autonomy and independence that felt intolerable. They believed that their defended isolation, their ability to make all decisions alone, their freedom from having to consider anyone else's needs or feelings was essential to their well-being and their identity. They were confident that returning to this state would feel good, would feel like coming home to themselves, would restore the clarity and the autonomy they associated with being alone. This confidence was rooted in their idealization of independence and their defensive belief that they're better off without close connections. But the freedom and autonomy they've returned to doesn't feel the way they expected. The independence they thought they were protecting feels empty rather than fulfilling. Making all decisions alone feels isolating rather than liberating. Having no one to consider or coordinate with feels lonely rather than freeing. The life they've returned to lacks meaning and richness that their connection with you provided, and they're discovering that their idealized version of independent life was fantasy that doesn't match the reality of what that life actually feels like. The freedom they sought is revealing itself to be isolation they cannot make satisfying no matter how much they try to fill it with work or hobbies or superficial connections. The avoidant person was confident that they would be fine without you because they'd always been fine without people before, because their pattern had always been to leave relationships and to move on without too much difficulty, because they believed their defended independence was genuine self-sufficiency rather than defensive strategy. They looked at their history and saw themselves surviving relationship endings, maintaining their life and their functionality even while alone, and they assumed this pattern would hold with losing you. They didn't recognize that you were different from previous partners, that what you offered was more valuable and more rare than what they'd had before, that their attachment to you was deeper than their attachment to others had been, even if they weren't fully aware of this depth while you were together. The confidence that they'd be fine was based on comparison to previous relationship endings where they did recover relatively quickly. But those recoveries were possible because the people they lost weren't as significant or as right for them as you were, because the connections weren't as deep or as genuine, because what they lost was more easily replaceable. With you, they're discovering that the usual recovery process isn't working. Time isn't making it better. Distractions aren't effectively distracting. New connections aren't filling the void. They're not fine, and the growing recognition that they're not going to be fine, that this loss is different and more impactful than previous losses, is creating panic and regret that their false confidence prevented them from anticipating. The avoidant person was confident that leaving was the right decision because their defensive framework convinced them that the relationship's problems were insurmountable or that you weren't right for them in fundamental ways. They focused on incompatibilities, on things about you or the relationship that bothered them, on their discomfort with your needs or with the relationship's progression. They built a case in their mind for why leaving made sense, why it was necessary, why it was the mature and reasonable choice. This case was convincing enough to themselves that they felt confident they were making the right decision, that they would look back and be glad they left, that future them would recognize this as good choice, even if present them felt some discomfort about it. But the confidence in their decision is eroding as they're forced to confront that the problems they identified weren't actually about fundamental incompatibility, but were about their own defensive responses to intimacy. The things that bothered them about you or the relationship were mostly projections or manufactured justifications for creating distance. The incompatibilities they focused on were minor and workable, nothing that genuine partners couldn't navigate together. They're recognizing that they convinced themselves of narrative that supported the choice their fear wanted to make, and that this narrative was distortion rather than accurate assessment. The confidence that this was the right decision is being replaced by the devastating recognition that it was a catastrophic mistake made from defended fear rather than from wisdom or clear sight. How your absence created void, they cannot fill. The most significant way that leaving your side has ruined the avoidant person's life is through the creation of a void, an absence in their daily experience and their emotional life that they cannot fill, no matter what they try. This void is not just about missing your presence or missing the relationship. It's a fundamental emptiness created by the loss of what you specifically provided to them, what you uniquely offered that no one else they encounter can replicate. Understanding this void and why it's unfillable reveals why the avoidant person's life has deteriorated so significantly since leaving you. The void exists first in the loss of being truly known and understood by another person. The avoidant person maintains defended distance with most people, sharing only surface aspects of themselves, never allowing anyone to truly see or know them. But with you, they allowed more access than usual. They shared aspects of their history, their thoughts, their internal experience that they typically keep hidden. They allowed you to see their patterns and their wounds, even if they couldn't fully acknowledge this seeing while it was happening. And instead of using what you saw against them or rejecting them for it, you responded with understanding and acceptance. This experience of being known and still accepted is extraordinarily rare and valuable, particularly for someone whose defensive structure is built on the belief that being known leads to rejection. Now that you're gone, they've lost the only person who truly knew them, and they're back to the defended isolation where no one really sees them, where they're always performing and managing their image. This loss of being known creates void because the defended distance they maintain with others prevents anyone new from knowing them the way you did. And even if they were willing to allow someone that level of access, the specific understanding and acceptance you offered was about the unique match between your capacity and their needs. The void exists in the loss of the specific emotional support and stability you provided. The avoidant person might claim not to need emotional support, might maintain that they handle everything alone, but the reality is that your presence provided grounding and regulation they weren't fully aware of. Your consistency, your patience, your ability to remain stable when they were chaotic or withdrawn, all of this created container of safety they didn't recognize until it was gone. When they were anxious or stressed or struggling, your presence, even if they didn't explicitly seek support, provided comfort and reassurance. Your belief in them, your acceptance of them, functioned as external source of validation that helped regulate their often fragile sense of worth. Without you, they've lost this support and this regulation, and they're discovering that they're not as self-sufficient emotionally as they believed. The void created by loss of your emotional support is unfillable because the new people they encounter either don't offer this type of support or the avoidant person doesn't allow them close enough to provide it. The void exists in the loss of the companionship and the specific quality of connection you shared. The avoidant person is discovering that companionship is not generic or easily replaceable, that the specific way they connected with you, the conversations, the shared humor, the activities you enjoyed together, the comfortable silences, the intellectual engagement, was unique to the match between who you are and who they are. They might spend time with other people, might date others, might maintain social connections, but these interactions feel hollow compared to what they had with you. The conversations aren't as engaging. The humor doesn't land the same way. The activities aren't as enjoyable. The connection feels forced or surface level rather than natural and deep. This void in meaningful companionship is making them recognize that you weren't just filling time or providing generic social interaction, but were offering specific quality of connection that matched their needs and preferences in rare way. The void exists in the loss of the future possibilities and the shared vision you were building together. While they were with you, even if they were ambivalent or resistant, there was future that included you, plans and possibilities, and potential that gave their life direction and meaning. They might have been planning trips, considering living situations, imagining how their lives would intertwine over time. These future possibilities, even when they felt threatening, provided structure and meaning to their present. But leaving you meant abandoning all of these future possibilities, returning to undefined future where they're alone and where the trajectory of their life is uncertain or empty of the meaning that building something with someone provides. The void created by loss of shared future is unfillable because the future now stretches ahead without the markers and milestones that partnership provides, creating existential emptiness that solitary pursuits struggle to address. The void exists in the loss of being prioritized and being important to someone in the way you prioritized them and made them important. The avoidant person might have resisted or felt uncomfortable with how much they mattered to you, might have pushed back against your investment or your care. But that mattering, that being important to someone, that being prioritized and thought about and cared for, provided validation and significance they weren't aware they were depending on. Now that you're gone, they've lost the experience of being that important to someone, and they're discovering that this loss creates void in their sense of their own significance and worth. New people they encounter might show interest, might want to spend time with them, but the depth of care and the level of prioritization you offered is absent, and this absence makes them feel less important, less valued, less significant than they felt when you were making them central to your life. The void exists in the loss of the acceptance of their authentic self that you offered. The avoidant person shows most people a curated version of themselves, the defended image they've constructed. But with you, they could occasionally drop this performance, could show their struggles, or their fears, or their needs, could be less than perfect, or less than completely independent. You accepted these moments of authenticity rather than rejecting them or using them against them. This acceptance of their authentic self, rare and precious, is now gone, and they're back to constant performance with everyone they encounter, never being able to truly relax into being themselves because no one else has demonstrated that they can be trusted with that level of authenticity. The void created by loss of this acceptance means they're isolated, not just from you, but from their own authentic self, forced back into defended performance that prevents genuine connection. The void is unfillable because what you provided was not generic or functional, but was specific to who you are and to the unique match between your capacity and their needs. And because the avoidant person's defensive patterns prevent them from allowing anyone new close enough to even attempt to fill the void. They cannot replace you because you're not replaceable. They cannot find someone else who offers what you offered because what you offered emerged from the specific combination of your qualities and their resonance with the avoidant person's needs. And even if someone with similar qualities existed, the avoidant person's defenses would likely prevent them from recognizing this person or from allowing them close enough to provide what you provided. So the void remains and expands and becomes more apparent with time, ruining their life, not through dramatic collapse, but through progressive emptying of meaning and connection and satisfaction. The progressive deterioration they didn't anticipate. The avoidant person expected that if leaving your side created any difficulty, it would be acute but temporary, an initial period of discomfort, followed by gradual improvement as they adjusted to being alone and as they move forward with their life. But instead, they're experiencing progressive deterioration, where their life and their well-being are getting worse over time rather than better, where the passage of time is highlighting rather than healing the loss, where they're declining in ways they didn't anticipate and cannot seem to reverse. Understanding this progressive deterioration reveals why leaving you has ruined their life in ways that extend far beyond the immediate loss of the relationship. The deterioration is evident in their emotional state, which is worsening rather than improving as time passes. Initially, after leaving, the avoidant person might have felt the relief they anticipated, the easing of intimacy anxiety that confirmed their choice. But as weeks and months have passed, this relief has been replaced by increasing emotional distress, loneliness that's more intense than they expected, regret that grows rather than fades, anxiety about having made catastrophic mistake, depression as they recognize what they lost and cannot regain. They're experiencing emotional pain they didn't anticipate, and that doesn't respond to their usual coping strategies. The defended isolation that usually protects them from emotional pain is failing because the pain is about the isolation itself and about what the isolation cost them. Their emotional state is deteriorating because the full weight of what they lost is becoming clearer over time rather than fading into insignificance as they assumed it would. The deterioration is evident in their ability to connect with others, which is diminishing rather than expanding. The avoidant person might have assumed that being single again would open up possibilities for new connections, that they would enjoy dating or meeting new people, that they would find someone easier or more compatible. But instead, they're finding connection more difficult than before. They compare everyone to you and find them lacking. They're more defended and more cynical than they were before. They're less willing to invest or to try because they're aware at some level that investment didn't protect them from loss with you, and that creating distance didn't protect them from pain. Their capacity for connection, never robust, is shrinking further as they retreat more deeply into defended isolation, making the loneliness worse and making the possibility of finding meaningful connection more remote. The deterioration is evident in their engagement with their life and their activities, which is declining as they recognize that the things they do feel less meaningful without someone to share them with. The avoidant person might have hobbies, career pursuits, interests that they told themselves were sufficient for fulfilling life. But without you, these activities are revealing themselves to be less satisfying than they were when they had relationship to balance them. Achievements feel hollow without someone who cares to share them with. Hobbies feel solitary and somewhat pointless. The career success they're achieving isn't providing the satisfaction it used to because they're recognizing that professional success is poor substitute for intimate connection, and that arriving home to empty space after success makes the success feel empty too. Their engagement with their own life is deteriorating because they're losing motivation and finding less meaning in pursuits that aren't shared. The deterioration is evident in their physical health and their self-care, which often declines when people are emotionally suffering. The avoidant person might be sleeping poorly, plagued by regret and anxiety that intrude on rest. They might be eating poorly or drinking more, using substances or behaviors to manage the emotional pain they're experiencing. They might be neglecting exercise or other health practices because depression or anxiety is sapping their motivation. They might look physically different, tired, less vital, showing the wear of their internal struggle in their external appearance. This physical deterioration creates feedback loop where poor physical state worsens emotional state, which further deteriorates physical state, creating downward spiral they're struggling to reverse. The deterioration is evident in their work performance and their professional life, which might be declining as their emotional state and their preoccupation with their loss affects their focus and their effectiveness. The avoidant person might be distracted, thinking about you and about what they lost when they should be working. They might be making mistakes they wouldn't have made before. They might be less productive, less creative, less engaged with their professional responsibilities. Colleagues might notice the change, might comment that they seem off or that their performance has declined. This professional deterioration creates additional stress and potentially additional consequences that compound the damage leaving you has created. The deterioration is evident in their social connections and their relationships with friends and family, which might be suffering as the avoidant person withdraws further or as their emotional state makes them difficult to be around. They might be more irritable, more withdrawn, less available for the people who care about them. Friends might be frustrated by their obvious suffering, combined with their refusal to take responsibility for the choices that created it or to do anything to address it. Family might be concerned but unable to help because the avoidant person won't allow closeness or vulnerability that would permit support. These deteriorating social connections increase the isolation and the loneliness, creating another feedback loop where isolation makes them more difficult to be around, which increases isolation, which worsens their state. The deterioration is evident in their sense of themselves and their self-esteem, which is declining as they're forced to confront that their defensive strategies aren't serving them and that they're the architect of their own suffering. The avoidant person's self-image was partly built on their independence, their emotional control, their ability to make rational decisions and to manage their life effectively. But the progressive deterioration of their life since leaving you is challenging all of these self-perceptions. They're not as independent as they believed, if independence feels this lonely and unsatisfying. They're not as emotionally controlled as they believed if they're experiencing this much distress. They're not as rational as they believed if they made decision that has ruined their life. This erosion of their self-image creates additional psychological pain and makes the deterioration worse because they're losing not just you, but also their sense of who they are. The deterioration is particularly cruel because it's making them recognize the truth they were avoiding, that they need intimate connection, that their defended independence is not sustainable or satisfying, that they had something valuable that they destroyed through their own patterns, and that they might not be able to recover what they lost or to find anything comparable. Each of these recognitions is painful, and together they create progressive dismantling of the defensive narrative they relied on, leaving them without the psychological protection that narrative provided, and without the relationship that could have made them happy if they'd been capable of receiving it. The life they've returned to is not better than the life they had with you. It's demonstrably worse, and getting progressively more so, confirming that leaving your side was not the liberation they anticipated, but was catastrophic error, whose consequences they're only beginning to fully understand. Why? They cannot undo the damage their leaving created. The avoidant person is living with the growing recognition that leaving your side has ruined their life, but they're also confronting the devastating reality that they cannot undo this damage, cannot reverse the consequences of their choice, cannot restore what was broken through their departure. Understanding why the damage is irreversible reveals both the permanence of their loss and the tragic nature of their situation. The first reason they cannot undo the damage is that you've moved forward in ways that mean you're no longer available to them, even if they wanted to return. Time has passed, and you've used that time to heal, to grow, to rebuild your life without them. You've recognized your worth, and you've developed boundaries that prevent them from accessing you. You might have met someone new who can actually meet your needs in ways the avoidant person never could. You've closed the chapter that included them, and reopening it is not option you're interested in, or that would serve your well-being. The avoidant person's assumption that you would wait, that they could return whenever they were ready, has proven completely false. You've genuinely moved on, and their window for returning has closed. This finality means that even if they want to undo their choice, even if they recognize it was a mistake, they cannot because you're no longer available as option. The second reason they cannot undo the damage is that trust, once broken through their patterns and their departure, cannot be easily or quickly restored, even if you were willing to try again. You experience their withdrawal, their inconsistency, their emotional unavailability, their ultimate departure. You learn through painful experience that they cannot maintain intimacy, that they run when things get too close, that their words and their actions don't align, that they prioritize their comfort over the relationship's health. Even if they came back expressing regret and promising to do better, you would have legitimate reasons not to trust these promises. You know that regret is not the same as capacity, that promises are not the same as sustained change behavior, that their patterns are deeply embedded and unlikely to change without substantial therapeutic work they probably haven't done. The broken trust means that even if reconnection were possible, rebuilding what was broken would require years of consistent different behavior that the avoidant person is unlikely to be capable of providing. The third reason they cannot undo the damage is that their patterns haven't actually changed, and without genuine change, returning would just recreate the same problems that led to their leaving in the first place. The avoidant person might regret leaving, might miss you, might want to try again, but unless they've done deep therapeutic work to address their attachment wounds, unless they've developed new capacity for tolerating intimacy, unless they've practiced staying present when they want to flee, they're the same person who left. They would experience the same intimacy anxiety. They would employ the same defensive strategies. They would create the same push-pull dynamic. Reconnecting without genuine change would just restart the painful cycle, leading to the same outcome eventually, wasting more of your time and creating more hurt for both of you. The avoidant person cannot undo the damage because undoing it would require them to be different than they are, and that difference requires work they probably haven't done and might never do. The fourth reason they cannot undo the damage is that the specific moment in time when your relationship existed cannot be recreated. Relationships exist in specific contexts. The people you both were at that time, the circumstances of your lives, the particular intersection of readiness and possibility. That moment has passed. You're different now. They're different now. The circumstances have changed. Even if you were willing to try again, Even if they had genuinely changed, you wouldn't be picking up where you left off or recreating what existed before. You'd be starting something new with all the history and the hurt-creating backdrop that would affect everything. The innocence and the hope that characterized the original relationship cannot be reclaimed. The damage cannot be undone because the past cannot be accessed or repeated, only remembered with the pain of knowing it was squandered. The fifth reason they cannot undo the damage is that you've likely told others about how they treated you, about their patterns, about the hurt they caused, and this creates social consequences and reputational damage that cannot be easily erased. Your friends and family know what they did. They know about the withdrawal, the inconsistency, the departure. These people who care about you are unlikely to support reconciliation. They're likely to view the avoidant person negatively, to distrust them, to encourage you to protect yourself from being hurt again. Even if you wanted to try again, you would face social pressure and concern from people who love you and who don't want to see you return to situation that hurt you. The avoidant person cannot undo the damage because the damage exists not just between the two of you, but in your social networks and in the perceptions of people who witnessed what happened. The sixth reason they cannot undo the damage is that their leaving created emotional injury in you that has healed in ways that don't include space for them anymore. You were hurt by their patterns, by their departure, by their inability to show up for you. That hurt required healing, required you to process and to grieve and to rebuild. In doing that healing work, you likely developed new understanding of what you need and deserve, new boundaries, new standards. The healing has made you stronger and clearer, but it has also closed certain doors. The damage cannot be undone because the injury they caused has healed in shape that doesn't accommodate them, that protects you from repeating patterns that hurt you. You've grown beyond the version of yourself that would accept what they could offer, and that growth is protective barrier against their return. The seventh reason they cannot undo the damage is that the regret and the recognition of their mistake, while genuine, came too late to prevent the loss and came without the change capacity that would make reconciliation viable. They recognize now what they didn't recognize then. They value now what they took for granted then. They want now what they pushed away then. But this belated recognition is just that, belated. It came after they already made the choice, after they already left, after the damage was already done. Recognition without change capacity is insufficient. Wanting things to be different without being different themselves is inadequate. The damage cannot be undone because the time for different choices was while they had you, and they made the choices they made based on their wounds and their fears, and now they're living with consequences that their belated recognition cannot reverse. The eighth reason they cannot undo the damage is that life is not a simulation that can be reset or a video game that allows replays with better decisions. Choices have consequences. Actions have results. Time moves in one direction. They left your side, and that leaving set in motion. Chain of events that cannot be reversed. You healing and moving forward. Trust being broken. Opportunities being lost. Futures being altered. The damage is irreversible because reality doesn't offer do-overs. They get to live with the consequences of their choice, carrying the knowledge that they had something valuable and they destroyed it, that their life could have been different and better if they'd been capable of receiving what you offered, that they ruined their own chance at happiness through patterns they were too defended to address in time. This irreversibility is the final element that makes leaving your side so devastating for them. They cannot undo it. They cannot fix it. They cannot go back. They can only move forward into future that will always include the knowledge of what they lost and what they can never recover. carrying the weight of recognizing that they are the architect of their own ruined life, and that the person who could have made that life good, who tried to make it good, is gone in ways that all their regret and all their recognition cannot change.